Administration's new report on cloned animals. The agency says food and milk from cloned animals are safe to eat as food from non-cloned animals.
The final documents on animal cloning for agricultural purposes, a risk assessment, which is more than 900 pages, a risk management plan, and a guidance for industry. After years of detailed study and analysis, the Food and Drug Administration has concluded that meat and milk from clones of cattle, swine, and goats, and the offspring of clones from any species traditionally consumed as food are as safe to eat as food from conventionally bred animals. All of these documents, as well as others that help explain cloning, our responses to public comments, and others that we'll talk about a bit later, are available on our website. FDA's mission is to protect and promote the health of the American public, and we use the best available science to make sure this happens. In our work related to food and feed, we often use risk assessments to determine whether new substances or technologies pose any unique risk to people or animals. This is an exhaustive process that includes evaluating peer-reviewed research, primary research, seeking advice and guidance from academia, the National Academy of Sciences, and other scientists involved in this area, as well as seeking feedback from members of the public and industry. From this process, FDA makes a decision based on the best available science. FDA is not recommending any additional measures be applied to the food or feed derived from these specified animals because food derived from these clones is no different from conventionally bred animals. In other words, the risk assessment concludes the meat and milk from cattle, swine, and goat clones are as safe to eat as the food we eat every day. These conclusions are in broad agreement with conclusions of the New Zealand Food Safety Authority and with the conclusions of the European Food Safety Authority's draft opinion for comment and with the 2002 report of the United States National Academy of Sciences. At this time, FDA does not have sufficient information to make a decision on food consumption risks from clones of species other than cattle, swine, and goats, and so we continue to recommend that edible products from sheep clones or other species not be introduced into the human food supply. Now I'd like to turn this over to Dr. Stephen Sunloff, who was the director of the Center for Veterinary Medicine during the time that the risk assessment was performed. Earlier this month, he became the director for FDA's Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition. Dr. Sunloff?
Thank you, Randy. And now turning to the specifics of animal cloning for agricultural purposes, the agency is not recommending any additional measures be applied to the food or feed derived from these specified animals, because food derived from these clones is no different from conventionally bred animals. In other words, the risk assessment concludes that the meat and milk from cattle, swine, and goats are as safe to eat as the food that we eat every day. These conclusions are in agreement with those expressed by the National Academies of Science in 2002, and at this time, the agency does not have sufficient information to make a decision on food consumption from clones of species other than cattle, swine, and goats. And so we continue to recommend that edible products from sheep clones and other species not be introduced into the human food supply. Because clones will be primarily used for breeding, they are not expected to enter the food supply in any significant number. Clones will be used in the same way as other elite breeding animals are, to be used as sires and dams of sexually reproduced animals that will be used to produce food. The agency is not requiring any additional measures such as labeling for foods from these animals should companies wish to market them. In general, the FDA requires specific food labeling if there is a safety concern that labeling could adequately address, or if there is a material difference in the composition of the food. However, based on extensive review of the scientific information, the agency scientists determined that no material difference exists between food from clones of cattle, swine, and goats, or sexually reproduced offspring of clones and food from conventionally bred animals, and therefore poses no additional safety concerns.
Thank you, Dr. Sunloff. Good morning, everyone. USDA fully supports and agrees with the FDA final assessment that meat and milk from cattle, swine, and goat clones pose no safety concern, and these products are no different than food from traditionally bred animals. Now that FDA has evaluated the scientific data and the public comments and issued its final risk assessment, USDA will join with the technology providers, producers, processors, retailers, and domestic and international customers to facilitate the marketing of meat and milk from clones. We'll be working closely with stakeholders to ensure a smooth and seamless transition into the marketplace for these products.
Hi, Dennis Powell with ABC News. This is for, I assume, Dr. Sunloff. Dr. Sunloff, you said that there are very strong opinions about the use of cloned meat and dairy, yet in the same breath you said that you're not going to ask for labeling of this meat. Why not?
Thank you. As I said in my opening remarks, that the FDA does not require labeling if there is no food safety issues, that labeling would provide information to the consumer that would be helpful in making their determination. For instance, things like allergens in food for certain allergic people. Similarly, we don't require labeling if there is no material difference in the food processed by one technique, in this case it would be through the cloning process, versus traditionally or conventionally processed food. So there's really nothing for us to label. Right. The Food and Drug Administration really doesn't have the authority to require that if it doesn't meet those other two criteria, whether there's a safety concern or whether there's a material difference in the food than what people normally expect. There may be avenues for labeling. For instance, if the company wanted to label their products affirmatively that they came from animals that were clones, they would have the ability to do that. If they wanted to label their products in the other direction as certifying that they were not produced from animal clones, with the right caveats, that could be accomplished too. So there can be labeling that allows the public to have that kind of information. The FDA is not requiring that producers of animal clone products label their meat as such, meat or milk as such.
Thank you. There's a question in the back and then one up on the front right side. Two in the back.
Thanks. Jeff Young with Public Radio International's Living on Earth. I'm following up on the labeling question. Maybe we can find out to the gram how much protein or fat is in our food, but we won't be able to find out if it's cloned or not. That seems like information consumers would want. How is it that you are addressing the public concern if you're not requiring labeling? As the earlier gentleman indicated, you recognize that there is some unease among consumers. Isn't this, wouldn't labeling help address that unease? And I'm wondering what percentage roughly of the public comments that you received had to do with the desire for labeling?
On the first question, I think we've partially, at least partially, if not fully answered, but I'll defer to Dr. Sunloff on the second. Dr. Lutter.
Actually, I'd like to take the first one and then refer the second part of it to my colleague. With respect to labeling, we're not requiring labeling or any other additional measures because the food derived from clones of these species and their progeny are the same as other products already on the market. So we have therefore no authority under the statutes to mandate such labeling. Should producers express some wish on their own to provide some labeling, as Dr. Sunloff has mentioned, for example, that a product is clone free, we will evaluate such claims on a case-by-case basis and to judge whether or not they comply with statutory requirements that labeling not be false or misleading. So that's, and I think you had a second question that I'll leave to my colleague.
The number of public comments that indicated a desire for a label.
Yeah, I don't have exact information on the number of products that, or the number of comments that we received that spoke to labeling, but I think it's around half of them. So there was great public interest in this issue.
For those people to, I mean, you obviously have a great desire for this. You're not accommodating them.
I think as Dr. Lutter just explained, it's not a matter of whether or not we think we should or not. It's a matter of, do we have the authority to require that companies label their product? And clearly in this case, we don't believe that we do. We have been working with the companies that provide this technology, and they have initiated what they're calling a supply chain management, which is a process by which they would register every animal that was an animal clone and certify that those particular animals were not part of the food supply. So I think there will be alternative labeling that will exist in the future to accommodate those individuals who really do not want to consume products from cloned animals.
There was another, sorry, pardon me. There was another question in the back in the center. No? Okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's Val Willingham from CNN. Again, I don't mean to dwell on the same question, but did the FDA not do focus groups with people and that they ethically were opposed to this?
I think we have answered the question. I'd rather go to something new if that's okay with folks. There's somebody on this side, somebody in the middle. Actually, you were next. Yeah. Yeah.
Josh Gross, CBS. Is there a system for tracking these animals, even if they're not in the food system?
Somebody take that?
As I believe Dr. Sunloff had mentioned, the technology providers that are putting the opportunities for cloning and cloned animals out there recently announced that they were going to have a value chain management system, in which case they would put in place voluntarily a tracking mechanism with an understanding of how to track, monitor those animals as they move through their lifespan. But you would need to talk to those technology providers for additional details on that matter.
Gentlemen.
Mark Heller, I'm with the Watertown Daily Times in New York. I'm reminded a little bit of the experience with bovine growth hormone, where scientifically, basically, we're told that there's no real significant difference between milk from a treated cow or an untreated cow, and yet the public has not totally embraced that concept. And I wonder what you've learned from that experience that maybe could help us understand a little bit better about the review and in this case, and what we should look forward to.
Thank you. That's a good question for me because I was there when we approved recombinant bovine growth hormone for use in dairy cattle. Just let me say that at the time that we approved that drug in the FDA, we had very similar conversations as to what we are having now, and I think it's very appropriate that you would raise this issue. And at that time, there was great concern that the public would quit or reduce substantially their intake of dairy products as the result of the approval of this particular drug for dairy cattle. What we found out was that there was no reduction in consumption of milk or dairy products as the result of that approval. There is still concern, and in many cases, dairy producers are not using the product because the market is such that people are demanding that products be produced in a more natural way, free of extraneous drugs. So, but the marketplace does seem to be sorting that out, and there is still a large market for recombinant bovine growth hormone. At the same time, there is an adequate supply of milk which is labeled as being free from that particular drug being used in dairy cattle.
My name's Allison Smith. I'm with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. I guess I have a two-part question. First of all, if you don't think you have the authority to mandate labeling for this kind of food, who does? And secondly, is it enough, given the widespread concern that people have these days about the food supply, where it's coming from, what's in it, all of those things? Is it enough for you to really just stand up there and say, we think it's safe, it's no different? What measures do you think will persuade consumers that, in fact, that this is safe and this is good to eat?
Clearly, this is a question that several of you have, so why don't we go back to that and ask Dr. Lutter to address it?
Let me offer another insight on the labeling, if you will, and that is we lack authority to mandate labels of food as being from clones because we find that there's no scientific difference. There is, however, already an opportunity for consumers to buy in the marketplace food that is not from clones if they choose, and that is in the United States, food labeled as organic under existing interpretations of regulations may not come from clones. And in that sense, consumers who really want not to buy these products may rest assured that organic foods are not from clones. Thank you.
Next question, please.
Eminent people such as yourself just stand up and say, we think it's safe. They want some other kind of reassurance. You talked about a marketing program and a smooth and seamless transition. What are you going to do to reassure consumers?
Let me talk about the first part of that, and then I'll turn to my colleague, Mr. Knight, for the second part. We think we're also revealing today a collection of other information on our website dealing with myths, with Q's and A's, which will help consumers and also help the media understand the nature of this new technology and our finding that it is safe. Our finding is not alone. We are not unique in reaching this. It is also one echoed by, as I mentioned earlier, a New Zealand food safety authority, a European food safety authority, and it was also echoed by the United States National Academy of Sciences. So we believe that our commitment to the American public is as a science-based, science-led regulatory agency. That's what people consistently say they want from us. We think that we're delivering here exactly that sort of decision. We've reviewed all the scientific data. We've sent it to peer review. It's consistent with the National Academy of Sciences. We've sent it out for public comment. Based on all of that, this is the conclusion that we've reached and we're sharing with you today.